Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Miss Wagers. I am one of your fourth grade teachers here in Topeka Public Schools, and I am super excited to get to read Porpoises in Peril with you. This is one of my favorite stories that we read in fourth grade, so I'm hoping that you're really enjoying it too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our learning intentions for today. We are learning to determine the point of view from which a story is told. That way we can tell who the narrator in a story is, because depending on the story, different people will tell the story. And we'll talk more about that and what that really means. So we know we're successful when we can define what point of view is, identify the narrator in the story or who's telling the story, and then explain how the point of view can affect the story, because depending on who's telling the story, you might get a whole different story. So our foundational skills for today is that we are going to be focusing on reading the words ending with endings ed and ing, so those two suffixes. So we do have a little snippet of our practice reader here, Dorothea Dix, teacher and reformer. Okay, and we're just going to go through some of these words. I'll probably go through this first column with you. Okay, and I want you to read the words with me. Okay, so I will read the word and then I'm going to pause for a second for you to be able to read the word as well. I really want you to focus on those ed and ing endings. Okay, so we have accepting, admired, allowed. Oh, I wasn't pausing. Sorry. Allowed, allowing, cared, caring, caused, changed, continued, ended, explaining, finding, helping. So those are all the words from this first column here. So on your own, you can practice reading these words even more and getting really quick with them and making sure that you're getting those ed and ing endings. Because whenever you see those when you're reading, you should know exactly what sound those letters make. So whenever I see the ed ending, I know it's going to end with ud. And whenever it ends in ing, I know I'm going to end with ing. Okay, so let's continue. We have a couple of vocabulary words that we are going to go over. So we have the word rickety, and that means that it's not strong or stable, like it's likely to break. So we can see in this picture here, there's this bridge and it looks pretty worn down. It's not looking like it's in good shape, and it's not one that I would want to be walking over. So I would say that bridge is pretty rickety. And then the second word we have is peculiarly. So that means not in a usual or normal way. So we can see that this lady here, she's going down the stairs on her hands. That would not be usual or normal. And we can say that's a peculiar way to walk down the stairs. So let's go ahead and we're going to get started with reading chapter 2. Now make sure that as I'm reading, that you are paying attention with your eyes on the text and that you are listening with attention. So you're sitting up, you're comfortable, and you're really ready to focus and pay attention to what's happening in the story. Chapter 2. The next morning, the team stood outside the front of the inn and looked around at the small town in daylight. There wasn't much to it. The small inn, some houses, and a few other guest houses that served the tourists who came mainly to see the porpoises. There were hardly any people in sight, and the beach was a 2-mile walk from town. Outside, in front of the inn, Reggie found a taxi to take them to the beach. But just as he opened the door, a man carrying a briefcase came from nowhere, rushed past him, and jumped in. Kate noticed the letters DDJ written in small letters on the man's briefcase, and a whiff of citrus and cedar floated out the window behind him. Reggie stood open-mouthed, watching the taxi speed off. So let's stop and think for a second. How does Reggie feel about the man with the briefcase? Pause and think. Well, I see right here that Reggie stood open-mouthed, watching the taxi speed off. So he's probably like surprised or flabbergasted, maybe even a little upset that this man just came and stole their taxi. That's rude, muttered Cam, wrinkling his nose at the smell. So there we know, they're not feeling too happy about this. He spotted 4 rickety, old-fashioned bikes at the front of the hotel. Remember those words, rickety, sounding like they're old or likely to break. Okay, so they're not in too good of shape. Nodding to Reggie, he said, "We can use these bikes to get to the beach. That will solve our transportation problem." After a bumpy, uncomfortable ride on the old bikes, they reached the beach and quickly located Dr. Bloodman's research station. They approached and gently pushed open the door to the small, weather-beaten hut. Dr. Bloodman looked extremely relieved to see them. "You must be the science squad," he said. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Stacks of papers cluttered his desk, and charts and coastal maps covered every inch of wall space in the tiny wooden hut. Dr. Bloodman smiled and peered at the team through the thick lenses. "I'm so grateful that Professor Q sent you. It's puzzling, but we have to find out what's wrong with our porpoises before it spreads. Also, they attract tourists, and as you'll have seen, the town is pretty quiet at the moment." He trailed off. "That's why we're here," Jada said. "Just tell us what you know." "Well, about 2 weeks ago, we started getting reports from the fishermen down on the beach about the porpoises acting peculiarly," he said. Remember, that's acting strange. We got the lady going down the stairs in a strange way. "Can you describe their odd behavior?" Reggie asked. Dr. Bloodman frowned in concentration. "Most of the fishermen on our island are very secretive," he began. "They don't like to talk to officials. You see, our town is so small that everyone knows everyone else. You might have better luck since you don't have an official look." He glanced at Reggie's cargo shorts and beat-up tennis shoes and Kate's leggings. "We like to be comfortable," said Cam, looking down at his clothes. "And anyway, we work in the field, hacking our way through dense forest, wading through swamps, and climbing mountains." Kate interrupted. "What about any unusual algae?" she asked. "Just what you would expect to find in these coastal waters," Dr. Bloodman replied. He talked for a few more minutes, but he didn't have any answers. It looked as if the survival of the porpoises was in the hands of the science squad. They thanked Dr. Bloodman and promised to let him know what they found. "Wait, one more thing," Dr. Bloodman called just as the team was about to squeeze out of the tiny door. "I received a communication from the Coast Guard that a barge loaded with mining equipment drifted very close to our island some weeks ago. Apparently, it lost steering power. It would have been a disaster if the barge had tipped and that oily equipment had landed in our waters. Anyway, the crew worked on the steering overnight, and by the next morning, it had vanished." "The mysterious vanishing barge," Kate said. "When did this happen?" 10 days before I sent the first porpoise report to Professor Q, said Dr. Bloodman. "Okay, I'll need the coordinates of the barge's overnight location, its route here, and its final destination," said Kate as she opened up a map app on her tablet and keyed in the information. "Thank you." "Thank you, Dr. Bloodman," Reggie said as he put his notes in his backpack. "We'll be sure to tell Professor Q how helpful you've been." So, our next stop and think question is, how do we learn about the island and the people who live here? So stop and think about it. Think about what we just read. Okay, I hope you've really thought about it. This is important when we're thinking about what's happened in this story so far. So when we're thinking about the island, Dr. Bloodman has really been the one who has taught the team about the people. He says that they're very secretive. Everyone knows everyone else, and they don't like to talk to officials. Okay, so those are some of the things that we've already learned about the island, and that came from Dr. Bloodman. So our learning intention today was thinking about point of view. So let's talk about what that actually is. So point of view has to do with who tells the story. So we call the narrator, the narrator is the one who tells the story. So that's what we're talking about when we say narrator. So a first person narrator is a part of the story. So like they're an actual character in the story. So the narrator would use the pronouns like I, me, we, and an our. Okay, so those pronouns, they include me in it. Okay, so if I'm the narrator and I'm using a first person, I'm writing it in first person, I'm in the story, I'm a character. Then we have a second person point of view, and that's really not used that much, but it could involve one character telling the story to another, or more likely that you're giving directions and you're using the pronoun you. Okay, so like you do this first and you do this second. Okay, second person isn't super common. And then the other more common one is third person. And third person point of view is told by an observer rather than a participant in the story. So third person is not told by a character in the story. Okay, it uses the pronouns like they, it, him, and she, and her. Okay, so pronouns that don't involve me. Okay, like them over there, because the person telling the story is not part of it. So we want to look and think about what point of view is Porpoises and Peril told from. Okay, so let's reread a little bit. And what's the key here is that we're going to look for some of those pronouns. Do we see I's, me's, and my's? Or do we see they's, hims, hers? Okay, so really we just need to think about first or third person. So after a bumpy, uncomfortable ride on the old bikes, they, so I see they, reached the beach and quickly located Dr. Vledman's research station. They approached and gently pushed open the door to the small, weather-beaten hut. Dr. Vledman looked extremely relieved to see them. So they're right. So far I have 3 pronouns that don't include me. Okay. So right now I'm leaning towards third person. If I keep reading, it says, "You must be the science squad," he said. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Stacks of papers cluttered his desks, and charts and coastal maps covered every inch of wall space in the tiny wooden hut. Again, I'm seeing more he's and his. Okay, so again, those are pronouns that don't involve me, so I'm still thinking third person. Dr. Vledman smiled and peered at the team through thick lenses. "I am so grateful that Professor Q sent you. It's puzzling, but we have to find out what's wrong with our porpoises before it spreads. Also, they attract tourists, and as you'll have seen, the town is pretty quiet at the moment." He trailed off. Now, you might be confused right now because you're looking and saying, but right here it says, "I am so grateful," and "we," so those are pronouns that include me. But right here, Dr. Vledman's talking. This is dialogue, and we know it's dialogue by the little quotation marks that go around it. So those 2 little lines in the air, like the 2 little apostrophes in the air, that's saying that someone's talking. When we're thinking about point of view, we don't want to just look at the dialogue because that's just another tool that the author uses, dialogue, and we're not going to include that in the point of view. We want to look outside of that. So everywhere else I'm seeing he's, hims, they's. And when I'm thinking about who is telling this story, it's not anyone, it's not any of our characters. It's not Jada or Cam or Professor Q or Dr. Vledman. It's not any of the characters in the story. So this is a third person point of view. The narrator is not a character in the story. Okay, so third person point of view. So now we're going to talk going with point of view. So we're not just thinking about first and third. We also want to think about how the point of view can affect the story. So it says, from whose viewpoint do we learn about the barge? What does he believe about the barge? And we won't underline our evidence in the text this time. So wait, one more thing, Dr. Vledman called just as his team was about to squeeze out the tiny door. "I received a communication from the Coast Guard that a barge loaded with mining equipment drifted very close to our island some weeks ago." So right there, I know that Dr. Vledman was talking because it has those quotation marks around it. So I know from his viewpoint that we're learning about the barge. Dr. Vledman is the one that tells the team. "Apparently, it lost steering power. It would have been a disaster if the barge had tipped and that oily equipment had landed in our water. Anyway, the crew worked on the steering overnight, and by the morning, it had vanished." So again, what does he believe about the barge? Well, he believes that it could have been a big disaster, it says, if the barge had tipped over. Okay, so we know that Dr. Vledman, he's really glad that it was able to get away because he said that it could be a disaster if it tipped over. So that is my evidence. And the last thing with this is your reading response activity that you get to do on your own. So it says, how does the author describe Dr. Vledman and his research station? Okay, so again, this time when we're thinking about point of view, the author is trying to give you an idea, or the narrator is trying to give you this idea of what Dr. Vledman and his research station is like by including lots of details. So in your response, you need to find those details and explain how the author describes and Dr. Vledman and his research station. So you want to look for those details, use that text evidence to answer those questions. All right, I'll see you later, guys. Have a great day.